Thanks, and good afternoon to everyone. So I guess when you're looking at financing solutions, there's two elements to it. A lot of what we've heard today is really the macro financing needs. So there we're looking at how do we finance the grid, how do we finance massive projects, and that needs a macro solution. So a lot of that is mostly international companies that will be seeing international funds that are looking to deploy within their mandates into green energy. So, being able to bring the various stakeholders around the globe to be able to take part in the various funding needs that are required at a macro level is also a long-term solution. So like we've been hearing, trying to fix the solution by 2030 is a macro solution, and it's a macro time that's going to take place to be able to solve that issue. The other issue is the micro solutions. So how do we look at on the ground actually being able to finance the various projects? How do we keep businesses afloat? How do we reduce their input costs? How are we able to keep their lights on and their turbines going while there's load shedding taking place? And that's I think the main focus of the funding solutions that I'll be focusing on. The topic should have then actually been investment solutions. So if you're looking at how do you finance the ability to be able to still keep your business running, it's an investment decision. And as soon as you link the ability to be able to provide capital to roll out your solutions to an investment decision, it changes the way that you approach it. It changes how you see it. It changes the access that you have to be able to execute on these various deals. If you look at even in the Northern Cape, why is there 10 times more application for solar than the grid can allow? It's because all of those entities that are funding those solutions realize that there's so much sunshine in the Northern Cape that the investment decision makes the most sense there. So hence why there's so many applications to be able to put up these various sites in the Northern Cape, because there's enough sunshine in the Northern Cape to be able to power almost the whole of Africa. Just in terms of the irradiation levels that take place there, the sun's constantly shining. Whether you in Priska, Douglas, any of those areas, that's why they're such good agricultural areas. Access to water, but also access to sunshine, so photosynthesis can occur. The ability to be able to bring funding into a micro level is critical. So being able to look at how do we now execute to be able to bring funding to the level of the people on the ground. So that will be the main focus. If we can have the next slide, thank you. So I chatted briefly around the sunlight hours, but as if you look at the investment decision that you need to make, it's all about your consumption versus your production. So how much of the power that you are producing are you able to consume, and that's going to be able to what generates your revenue. At the end of the day, it all boils down to the profitability, to the reduction of your input costs, as well as the opportunity cost of not being able to run your businesses. So being able to measure what goes on in terms of your power usage, where is your power being used, all of that is critical to the investment decision. So if you look on the right-hand side, that's kind of a graph. In the red, you'll see that's the consumption. So there's a basic curve in most businesses in terms of how your power is consumed, with the blue portion being the penetration of something like a solar plant or a renewable energy plant. So being able to match when is the power being produced to when is it being consumed is key in being able to generate returns. Some of the key decisions that you have to be making is, offsetting the ability to have to use the grid power versus totally moving away from the grid. Those are going to change the investment metrics in terms of what you're trying to achieve. So if you look at going fully off-grid, it's really expensive, because even if you're looking at a solar plant, you need a generator, you need a battery backup solution. You need something to be able to keep the power up and running so that your solar can still generate power. A diesel generator is efficient in terms of the blend between solar energy and diesel, because the rough rule of thumb is around 30% of the generator capacity is able to keep up. That's how much power it's able to produce for your solar. So, it might mitigate some of your diesel costs in terms of how much you have to run your diesel generator, because it's able to just keep a base load of your solar running at the same time as your diesel generator. So it reduces the cost of having to keep the lights on through your various mitigants, such as a diesel generator. Batteries, we see the technology around the world evolving so quickly with new types of materials that we can make batteries out of instead of lithium or lead acid. We also see the price differential of those various solutions dropping constantly. The whole world is aware that we need to move more towards renewables. We need to move more into solar. So in terms of the investment into the R&D in these spaces, we've seen a massive increase in terms of the learning curve and in terms of what's available. Obviously, batteries are a lot more expensive, and it changes your investment decision. But there are still ways to be able to model your various solutions out. Most importantly, in terms of understanding what type of system you need to put in, is the financial modeling around it. So, having a reputable EPC being able to design your system that has financial models in place that can show you exactly what your financial returns are is critical to understanding how is it going to work. Being able to marry your financial model to your, your curve analysis in terms of your power consumption is the trick that, these EPCs need to be able to provide in that information to you. Next slide, thanks. So what are some of the drivers in terms of the costing of these various systems? I mean, if you're looking at a basic solar solution, there's various elements, and these are all driving the value that you're going to have to pay for your solution. Exchange rate, what is your annual consumption? How many hours a day do you work and consume power? What does that curve look like in terms of that power usage? How much available space do you have? Is it a rooftop? Is it an open field? Do you want to build a system just around a single pivot to be able to power those pivots? The reference yield. So what is the peak amount of power that you're using at any given stage? That's important to realize. If you overspec your system, you're producing more, let's use solar as the example, more solar than you're consuming. If you're not able to feed this into the grid, it's lost power, which means it's lost investment returns on the system that you've spec'd. That means you're paying for something that you're not using. And we all know in investment terms, that definitely doesn't make any sense. Your annual generation, and then you calculate the tariff or any savings that can take place. So a lot of the time, if you're looking at a commercial sense of a solar system, you're looking at what is a blended tariff that can be achieved in terms of buying the power from the grid. A lot of the time, if you're designing these systems properly, there's a discount to the normal tariff that takes place. That way, you're making a saving and it's driving your investment decision, as long as you are consuming everything that's being produced. In the Western Cape, it's a lot easier. You're able to feed into the grid. You get paid a certain fee by the power utilities there, and it helps with being able to flatten out your curves in terms of what's being earned. Next slide, thanks. I spoke briefly around how do you go fully off-grid, and there's various solutions. But once again, making use of a reputable EPC is critical in terms of being able to manage the actual design. So you're not over-speccing, you're paying exactly what you're looking for, and that way you're able to secure the funding that your savings are going to be able to carry the cost of it. We've spoken, that's quite technical in terms of the various options that are available, but once again, all pointing towards partnering and collaborating with the correct partners to be able to have the system designed. So I mentioned briefly about the peak and the penetration. That's the curves that you're seeing in terms of it. Obviously, registration with the relevant bodies is so critical to be able to make sure that it's legal what you're doing, feeding into your own grid. Or is it even a slightly larger grid that you need a wheeling license? Registration with NERSA, with various bodies, critical. Critical to your system in terms of how you manage your investment is your post-commissioning support. So does your EPC just put your solar system up and then forget about you? Never track what you're able to do on the system. Never track how much power you're using. If it goes down, how quick is their turnaround time in getting it back up? What do the SLAs look like? All of these are investment decisions that need to be taken right in the beginning to be able to understand, are you going to make your money back from the system that you're putting up? And what is the cost versus benefit of that? So the benefit must always outweigh the cost. That way you're making good investment decisions. Just like asset managers are choosing from the 40 stocks on the JSE, they're busy managing their risk, they're busy looking at the investment into those companies to be able to drive returns. You need to be doing the same thing and approaching it the same way in terms of these systems that you're busy looking at. And those all tie into the funding options that are available. Next slide, thank you. So there's the traditional funding. We've made mention of the banks, and I particularly liked what Chris Bosch said around them. They are funders, so they are not assisting you in your investment decision. So they will provide you funding to be able to then put the risk solely on your shoulders to be able to say, go find a designer, a builder, and a post-implementation support. They'll follow the normal credit vetting process. They'll want the securities in place. They'll, ask you to sign over your life and your family's trust and everything else to be able to secure the debt, and you got to pay them no matter what happens on your system. The benefit of going something like that route is there's some tax breaks. So recently we had an announcement around something called a Section 12B allowance. So there you get an accelerated tax allowance. So if you own your system, you're able to claim, I think it kicked in now recently, 125% of the value of that system in the year that you put it up. So there's a whole bunch of caveats. It has to be in the production of income, and there's all the tax laws around it. But if it's under a megawatt, you can claim it all in year one. If it's over a megawatt, you split it out 50, 30, 20. So that helps with your tax position. It helps with your balance sheet. But then you have a liability on your balance sheet that then can weaken your balance sheet in terms of being able to access other funding. So quite a few considerations. So with bank finance, it's normally a 5 to 10 year lease, and it's normally an installment sale agreement. Or you can follow the route of using your own money and just invest in it and hoping that you hit your investment metrics, unless you're following all of those various terms. Next slide, please. There's a few new funding solutions that are coming out to the market. So something like a lease to own or the installment sale agreement. There's your normal asset-backed finance that follows, an installment sale. Every month you pay back the same amount. But we know that with these energy solutions, the curve in terms of when you're utilizing the power or when are you achieving the savings is different to just a straight line method. So there's going to be some months where you're out of pocket, some months where you're in pocket to be able to run your investment effectively and always make sure that your cash flows can handle the various requirements. A new thing coming out to market now is a lease to own that's a variable lease to own. So there you're only paying for the power that you use. So if you enter into an agreement for 7 years, let's say, as an example, you'll pay more in summer when there's more sunshine. You'll pay less in winter when there's less sunshine. But there's always a residual value at the end. So if the sun is shining all the time and there's no rain and there's no storms, you can pay your system off quicker, and it's purely linked to the saving that you're getting on your electricity. That's great. But if it's only a solar system, for instance, and there's no backup being able to keep the system down, it means you're not paying any usage through the system. It means you're going to pay it off slower, and at the end of a 7-year period, there's a massive balloon payment that normally takes place. So it's a bit more of a hybrid system in terms of being able to get funding for it, but it's more directly linked to your cash flows and your savings that you're making use of through the systems. Next slide, please. Then there's a power purchase agreement, a PPA, or even something like a rooftop rental, which takes place in a lot of the commercial and industrial areas of looking for funding for various solutions. Now, if you look at the models that are built to be able to model out what is your system going to produce, how are you going to earn your returns? If you look at some of the models that sit in our world, it links up to 30 years worth of weather data. So we can calculate what is the average sunshine each month of each year to be able to actually extrapolate that information into a financial return that says this is how much you can expect based on the last 30 years. We all know that weather conditions over the last few years are changing quite drastically, and you can't really rely on the averages. So then you look at how do you build in assumptions to be able to say, if the weather changes by 10%, 5%, what does that investment return look like? And being able to link the funding directly to that so that you're able to make sure that the cost of the funding that you're achieving matches the investment return of what you're getting from your systems. A lot of the time, like I said, in terms of a rooftop rental, there is a discount to the price of the power that you're getting. So you're always able to then make sure that you are paying less than what the cost of the electricity would have been. That way, we've always been able to bring savings into the world of the person who's putting up this system. And all of these methodologies and models are scalable, whether you're looking at a 100 kilowatt peak or a 7 megawatt or a 100 megawatt. It all follows the same type of investment methodologies and the various access to funding that that takes place on it. The ability to make sure that your returns are being earned according to the models purely relies on being able to measure. So Dr. Theo mentioned the importance of being able to measure everything that takes place. There is technology there today that you're almost able to drill down to a per panel basis and be able to see, is there an issue in that string of solar panels or that wind turbine? Every solar panel comes with a degradation factor from the suppliers. They say that every year it's going to produce 0.5% less power. If you had technology that's now able to say this year it's produced 0.8% less power, the next year 0.9% less power, you know that your investment returns are degrading. And that way you're not going to be able to keep up with the cost of funding. So being able to utilize tech in the solutions of what you're busy building out is critical to be able to manage how you approach your funding requirements as well as your investment returns that are taking place in the systems that you're busy designing. With something like a rooftop rental, you don't get any tax breaks. Somebody else owns the site, normally the funder, but you manage to preserve your balance sheets. So there you don't have a massive liability and an asset that comes onto your balance sheet. So you're still able to access other forms of funding, but ultimate ownership remains with the funder, and that's their security. They can come take the system down, they can move the system around, and believe it or not, it is quite easy to actually take a system down and redeploy it onto another house, or onto another building, or onto another field. It depends on the type of system, but those costs of being able to move those systems most of the time are built into the funding as almost a provision against it happening in the future. In terms of a rooftop rental, that takes place especially when there's a multi-tenanted building, or you're renting out to multiple power users. There you get a discounted tariff that you're able to then get the savings from what you would have paid on the grid. And as a landlord, either keep those savings or be able to pass them on to your tenants, so you're able to attract better tenants. But at the same time, in the rooftop rental models, the funder will pay you to be able to rent that space on your roof or that field where it's put out. So then not only will you be able to be getting discounted tariff rates in terms of what you're paying for your electricity, but you actually get paid back a portion based on the financial modeling that takes place, whereby you earn additional income streams as well. So a lot of the time, small power users, but they in an industrial park, able to put up large systems on their house, sell it to their neighbors because you don't need a wheel. There's still just a microgrid in place, and they're able to then generate returns and additional revenue streams within their business. Next slide, please. I think one of the critical things to understand in terms of your funding options or your investment options that are out there is, where does that funding come from? So I mentioned that a lot of the macro issues being faced, that's all going to come from large international institutions where they are looking for investment returns. So they have a mandate, go invest in green energy, but they have to still be able to hit their metrics, be able to report to their board that the money that they've deployed is making money. The majority at the moment that we're seeing is coming through the private sector. So large institutions being able to invest into various funds, being able to invest into these various companies that are deploying the solutions, but at the same time, they have a minimum return that they need to be able to hit, and that's what's based in their decisions in terms of where they give their money. A lot of local fund managers are now being able to deploy into various green energy solutions. If you look in the Pension Fund Act, there's a regulation, it's called Regulation 28. So previously it stated that 15% of all the assets under management within a pension fund can be deployed into infrastructure spend. Green energy is infrastructure spend. With the latest change in legislation, they've increased that to 45%. So now we know that all our pensions that are invested, those pension funds have a mandate to be able to go deploy 45% of the total assets under management into infrastructure spend, which links into unlisted debt within the green energy space. So we're proving that even the government's able to see that we need to be able to open up the access to funding to be able to roll out these various projects, to be able to meet the pressing need of the energy crisis that we're facing. And then the change in the 12B deductions. So being able to include solar in terms of your tax breaks, is trying to stimulate people to be able to take it into their own hands and be able to put up their own systems to be able to execute on the rollout of the energy that's needed. So there are various solutions that are being promulgated and that are being brought into the world to be able to give access to funding to be able to roll out these energy solutions. In normal investing terms, there's most of the pension funds invest into stocks, and we know, stocks are really important. Equity-based investing is one of the best forms of investing. But around the world, alternative investing is gaining traction. It's one of the largest areas of investment that's taking place at the moment. And if you look at a lot of these international firms, they're choosing energy as the deployment vehicle for where they want to generate their returns for alternative investments. So they're busy looking for various options to be able to find partners and collaborate to be able to deploy their funds into solutions that are being rolled out in terms of energy solutions. Next slide, please. If you look at the various options that are out there, something like the Green Energy Fund. So this is a fund that we have set up within a Fedgroup at the moment. So we do funding into the various green energy solutions. Once again, we treat it as an investment. So if we're looking at just providing capital through to be able to deploy these various projects, that's not the mandate in terms of how funding should be done in our eyes. It is an investment, and you need to be able to work together with the people who are utilizing the power, who are buying these systems, to be able to protect their returns, as well as protect the availability of the system, the uptime of the system, and being able to make sure that all those financial metrics are being met in terms of the design and development. So within the fund, once again, everyone's been talking about collaboration. So being able to collaborate with EPCs, with designers, with the guys who look after the systems afterwards, clean the systems, the technologies. So all of that being included in the cost of funding is the way that funding should be done. Being able to enable the success of investment into a green energy solution is critical for the success of it. And we believe that that should be built into the cost of the funding, so that the person putting up the systems, the town putting up the systems, anybody utilizing that power has their investment protected, so that you're always able to drive the returns that are coming out of the various solutions. With technology in the various aspects of running these systems, like I said, it's exponentially increasing in terms of what's possible. And being able to include that in a price of funding is so critical to be able to protect investors' capital, but also generate the returns that are needed. So there are multiple of these funds springing up at the moment because of the global view in terms of how do we get funding into the various aspects of the energy crisis that's not just happening in South Africa, but globally at the moment. So like I said, there are multiple funding options that take place, but as soon as you start approaching it from an investment point of view, you start making the right decisions, you start partnering with the right people, and you start collaborating on a level that's driving wealth and energy security for everyone that's involved in the chain. Thank you.